we also know that they found different types of kitchen utensil artifacts towards the back hallway, which was said to be about 300 foot long, and I think it was 50 foot wide. And there supposedly was enough rooms in there for about 50,000 people to live in, but they hadn't fully explored the place yet. So we have yet to really kind of get an eye on what else may have been discovered. There was one room that they found that they said that when they walked into it, no amount of light that they could take in there would illuminate their surroundings, almost like they were standing in a black hole. They could not get enough light in there to see anything, but they said that it smelled like it smelled of snakes, and they said it gave one the feeling of the most dense and deepest of gloom being in that room. And that sounds to me pretty scary. Can you imagine being there, George, with a flashlight when you first find this place and walking into a room like that?
No, thank you.
No, neither myself. The Hopi Indians themselves, their mythology leans back into that area, and they talk about being taken underground during a time of when the earth had encountered devastation on the surface. They were taken underground by the ant people and the snake people, and they were given refuge until the cataclysm had passed. And this may have taken more than one generation in which they lived underground. And then when they finally came up to the surface of the earth through an opening called the Sipapuni, they emerged from the earth. This is akin to all the Mesoamerican and Central North American mythologies, which say that we were born from inside the earth and came to the surface. And again, it has a striking similarity in association when you're talking about snake people and underground and having some sort of a setup down there to where they could, even take in refugees for a certain period of time. There obviously has to be some sort of infrastructure down there. The discovery of this underground city in the Grand Canyon just led to one more piece of evidence that other mythologies of the American Indians that we take as, ho-hum and stuff that people just talked about around a fireplace really have to be looked at again because, just as much as they said they came from some vast underworld, which was apparently part of it was discovered, there may be other things like the snake people or the ant people we should also take a more scientific or more objective look at and not just simply write off as fantasies from a fringe element of society.
The Native Americans have a vivid imagination. They're creative people. What are the possibilities that they created the image of the lizard or ant people, or did you think they actually see these creatures?
I believe that these creatures are seen and experienced. And when I say experienced, because of ritual use of hallucinogens by most Native American cultures and ancient tribal cultures really from around the world, one of the predominant images that comes forth in a vision is that of a snake or a serpent. And it's usually an experience that is startling. I was in communication with Terence McKenna, and I asked Terence about saying that this report I've been studying these reports coming in from ethnologists talking about, tribal experiencers having encounters with serpents and being a prevalent image within these most sacred of their vision quests. And he told me that he encountered one time a reptilian humanoid, and he said that it was one of the most remarkable experiences of his life. But he could not give me any opinion as to the determination as to whether they came from some lost culture underground or from some another dimension. Although he was open to both.
That is remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, something was on this planet, and maybe still is,
and is, I believe, still is. And Arthur C. Clarke, his first book before he wrote his first book was Childhood's End. Childhood's End was written before his other great works, and it was about a story of a reptilian humanoid species group that comes back to Earth claiming to have been, having left here a long time ago, but associated with the dinosaurs of ancient times, and they consider this their planet, and they've come back from their voyage, and its effects on human civilization. The interesting thing to note was at the beginning of his book, I noticed that he writes his own foreword or note at the front, and it says the opinions offered in this book are not those of the author. So what else? I mean, who was giving him these ideas? And remember, he helped come up with the Rand Corporation with the idea of satellite technologies and other things like that too. So he was a leading edge artist. He was imaginative and he was pulling in information, but we don't know that some other forces weren't at work, whether they were physical, spiritual, or interdimensional or alien.
Are there other civilizations in other regions on this planet that talk about these kinds of people or creatures?
Oh, all over. I mean, we just have to look back at the...
And I'm talking about lizard or ant people.
Yes. The ancestors of the Aboriginals of Australia point back to the rainbow serpent and talk about the rainbow serpent having been the lizard were the first persons to come up. There's an area of the Yosemite National Park, the Miwoks of legend. The natives that were there talked about Bower Cave in Mariposa County. They called it Uten, and they said it was the center of creation of the world, and its inhabitants were home to the first people. Patal, one of the main characters of their legend, was the lizard man. He was one of the first people. And to this date, they believe that that cavern is still a sacred passageway of sorts. It's now closed off by water. Some people speculate that maybe they came up from the underground and the water closed the passage and they couldn't go back underground again. This is very much like the Hopis when they said they emerged through the Sipapuni. They did it through a bamboo shoot. And they say the knots in the bamboo shoot are actually evidence of what happened was they put the bamboo shoot, they started crawling on the interior of it like a ladder to get up to the surface. And as long as one of the boys was playing his sacred flute, it would continue. But as soon as the music stopped, the stalk closed in on itself, and those little knots in the stalk of a bamboo shoot, the Hopis believe, are signs of their ancient ancestors caught from between the netherworld of underground and the surface world.
Did you find the Hopis very willing to talk about this?
I was with an associate of mine named AJ, and we had followed up on the article, and I actually went down into the Grand Canyon with him. He entered a diabetic coma one night because his insulin bottle broke during the trek, and he could not make it out of the Grand Canyon. So and this was off path. I actually we found a cave, and I took an emergency blanket and put it over us. And he managed to survive the night, but I crawled out the next day without any water out of the canyon to go get help. We just so happened he went directly into intensive care for 3 days and had a colostomy bag, but we couldn't let that trip go. We ended up on the Hopi Indian Reservation. Even he and his state wanted to pull through on what we were doing there, and we just happened to come upon a house, and it was a magical kind of a stumbling along. We ended up on the doorstep of the traditional chief of the Hopi Indians, who was he was the traditional chief in as much as he was the chief of the area of the mesas, which is the oldest. It's called Old Rabbi. It's the most ancient, continually lived-in dwelling in North America, and he has no electricity or anything like that. And we sat down, and we had conversations over a number of years, to which the other Indians, because he would invite me to some of their dances, the other Indians really didn't appreciate his talking to me about things because they still saw me as the Pahana, that outsider, the white guy. And when they heard that we were engaging in conversations about the snake people, there was a resentment amongst other tribesmen that I was actually talking to him about these beings because they thought it was sacred. And during this time, he actually confirmed that I was, because I had told him the whereabouts of my suspicions of whereabouts where this cave was in the Grand Canyon that the Smithsonian had discovered, and he confirmed it. And at this point, he was actually, because he was so old, he was put into an old folks' home, and then they didn't allow me to have contact with him anymore. Interestingly enough, one evening we were sitting there, George, and my associate and I were talking to him because he's blind. There's no need for lights on, and we're sitting on a torn Naugahyde couch. He had his sitting off to the right of us. He was sitting in an armchair with his back to a multiple-pane old window. And it was nighttime, and the stars were out. And as I was sitting there talking to him about this lizard people, a light came down about maybe 700-800 feet away, and it split into two, to the left and the right, and a strobe started sequencing between the two light positions that had placed themselves there. And it was so remarkable because my friend and I were looking at this thinking this was almost like a Spielberg film. I mean, because the old pot stove was there, the blind Indian chief had his silhouette against the starlit sky and some sort of craft coming down. It was unbelievable. And I realized at that time that it was almost coming to the point of being magical and sacred of an experience, just that, witnessing it, and especially considering the topic of conversation. The actual location of where I suspect this of being, the location is actually connected through government maps showing there's a tunnel system leading out of this location along the Grand Canyon further south, and the tunnel that was planned on government documents actually intersects with San Francisco Mountain. And, you know, the Hopis believed that the Kachina dolls came from a tunnel underneath San Francisco Peak and flew into the air. Now I actually discovered this government map that shows that their planned tunnel system that they had for a hydroelectric power station there actually went southwards directly underneath the peak and ended up going west of Sedona to the Valle Verde area. And if you look at this location, you start wondering if there was already a massive tunnel system in this underground city that was discovered there and they just expanded upon it, or if some sort of a connection with a tube shuttle system they had between Page and also the Grand Canyon and then further south. So it was the whole experience up there talking to the Indians and finding these things out by doing other correlative research was enabled me to be able to have conversations which perhaps they realized that most other people wouldn't have, just coming there to the reservation to sit down and talk to them.
Where did they go, John, these creatures? What happened to them? Are they all underground, or did they leave?
Well, the reptilian humanoids once had open contact. It appears to be the case with surface humanity. And the last time they were here up in full form, there was a cloud canopy here that existed before the major collapse. This is where we get the whole flood story. And the cloud canopy was natural to our planet. And about 12,500 years ago, there was a major shift, and some of them went underground and retreated back into their cavern systems that they had already established communities and cities and cultural locations in. And others, maybe even before that, had decided to actually leave the surface of the Earth for some prolonged explorative trip into outer space to some other system, but were scheduled to come back at the close of the Mayan calendar because they felt that was a significant thing. So, in other words, we will decide what the next world will be when the new calendar comes into being. It's a fresh start. And that's what I have shared with your audience before. I personally believe, after the years of research with this and hearing these stories and immersing myself into the subject, that when you look at what's going on over Mexico City right now, it definitely seems to be, saying that something is going to be happening. Their presence being allowed us to see them during the 1991 solar eclipse, and you have to wonder why they allowed us to see them at that point. They could have been away, but they knew people's eyes were cast skyward. They would know they'd have to be seen. So what was of importance that they were trying to show us that they would be seen at that time was the possibility that they are also observing the sun, because they're trying to tell us in advance something is going to be happening. It's going to happen to do with particle physics and energy, and the crop circles are trying to relay the mathematics of transformation down to a scale that's an atomic particle scale. I perceive that the air and the molecules that we're actually going to breathe are actually going to be changed and vibrating at a different rate. So everybody will be having an experience of sorts.
Are you familiar with the very long Kokomo, Indiana hum story?
No. Refresh.
All right. For years, there's been a hum driving people nuts in Kokomo, Indiana. And, they've talked about it being industrial fans, just about everything. But some of the major newspapers, including ABC News, did a story on the unknown Kokomo hum.
Yeah,
I think there's
like
excavation. What's that?
Is that like the Taos hum?
Yeah,
like
same
in Taos,
thing.
New Mexico?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think it's excavation.
Yeah, it very well could be excavation. We could be hearing deep earth tunnel boring machines and their equipment running.
Yes.
We could be hearing extreme low wave frequency propagation that, the lower the frequency, it can penetrate Earth really well. And if you're trying to use even the shorelines of America as a diaphragm where you can send out a signal and have it just come off and hit the water, you might be able to communicate with submarines. But at the same time, you have something going on underneath our feet that we're just not aware of. I have said that if it's that easy, if the tunneling technology was achievable back in 1972, like supposedly it was, there are commercial and military applications going on right now of the submarine technology. We have to make sure that we take a good part of our military spending and start protecting our borders, because as you're finding out along Mexico, there's a lot of tunnels leading in and out of Mexico to the United States. So we have to start guarding our borders underground, which means we need new technologies even to detect tunnel mooring machines at our borders. How are we to know that the Russians haven't already bored under Alaska and are sitting at our doorstep?
We really don't.
There's a large part of our military applications that the general public has never been brought to their attention.
John, do you travel much in terms of speaking engagements or other conferences?
Oh, I do. I've met you at some of the conferences and such, and even been able to host an evening at one or two. I'm headed towards doing an appearance in Los Angeles. Let me pull it up my computer because I do so many engagements at times. At the Whole Life Expo in April 25th.
Okay.
Or New Life Expo, and I'll be appearing there in a UFO panel with several people that your audience will all recognize.
Very good. Stay with us, John, because up next we'll open up the phone lines. We can chat with you about reptilians and then these underground cities. I'm George Norrie. Back in a moment. Your calls, John Rhodes on Coast to Coast AM. And our special guest tonight, the crypto hunter, John Rhodes. You ready for some phone calls? John is. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Your phone calls, John Rhodes as well. John, of every place you've investigated, what area has fascinated you the most? Is it the Dulce area, or are there other regions on this planet?
I would like to possibly say that the Four Corners area and the Hopi Reservation have been my favorites, only because I've appreciated their culture and their mythologies as a background to my being there. So I seem to just kind of like get into it a little bit more. I've been all around the world. A lot of my youth, I grew up overseas in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. I've been in a couple war zones even. So I've enjoyed a lot of life, but the Hopis seem to resonate with me quite strongly.
Okay, let's go to the calls. East of the Rockies, Roy in Baltimore, Maryland. Go ahead, Roy. You're up with us.
Oh, how you doing, George and John?
Good, Roy.
Hey, Roy.
Yeah. I got a little story and then kind of a little question afterwards.
Sure.
Back in 2003, my wife died. We buried him, and my wife wanted to go back out to the graveyard. It was a big graveyard. And we was looking for the gravesite, and we finally found it. And up on this hill, about 50 foot away, was his dog laying up there. Me and there's nobody around. There's no houses around, and me and my wife's kind of scared to get out because he started walking towards the truck. And he's come up to the truck, and he real slow walking down. He's kind of old dog, big dog, mixed breed. And he got right down by my truck, the side of my door. And I looked down at him. He looked like he's smiling at me. His tail's a wagging. And I told my wife, I said, I want to pat him so we can get out here and put the flowers on the grave, right? And I got automatic windows in my truck, and I pushed the button, when I was telling my wife, and I looked back and I looked at the dog, and the dog looked like the devil. And I don't know what else, but his face didn't look like a dog anymore. It looked like the devil. And I screamed. I said, oh, my God, and I pushed the button. And when I looked back up, he was getting down, and he was normal. And he was walking back up to where he was. Mm. And I don't know what to think of that. I mean, should I take that personally? Was that meant for me, or did I just see some strange? Is that anything to do with them lizards?
Right. I would have to say that when you see something like that, we can't associate it with lizards, although the shape-shifting thing is maybe what you're thinking about. But there's been demons throughout time that have actually manifested in the form of a dog, and I guess Berkowitz was one of those people that thought that he had a dog talking to him, telling him to kill people. Not that that's happened to you, but just to show you that some sort of a demonic presence does take shape in the form of a dog, which most of us actually, when we look at a dog, you're right, we let our guard down, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all of a sudden it turned where you could see it looked demonic. So you almost gave yourself over to something, but luckily your intuition paid off and you didn't actually step out of that truck and
well, I did. We did. It went back over. I was nervous, though. I'll tell you that. I was really nervous, and I always think about that. I don't know what to think of it still to this day. I really don't.
Well, Roy, was the dog still there when you got out?
Oh, yeah, he went right back up on the hill and just laid there. I ain't seen him no more when we went back.
Well, maybe it sounds like he was guarding somebody laying there under one of those tombstones.
I'll never forget it. I mean, all I can describe it looked like the devil, and his face just looked like the devil.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. That was a great story.
Oh, it's the truth, and I hope I never see it again. A pleasure talking with you.
I wouldn't want to either.
Thanks, Roy. San Francisco we go, west of the Rockies. Hello, Douglas. Your turn.
Hey, as always, it's an honor to speak with you, Mr. Norrie.
Hey, Douglas, how are you?
Doing great. Much the better for speaking with yourself and Mr. Rhodes.
Well, thank you very much, Douglas.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
Thank you. I'd like to start off with a fun thing, and then if we have a moment's time, switch into the serious thing about some civil defense that Mr. Rhodes brought up. And so in terms of the fun thing, the old Battlestar Galactica series that was produced by Glenn Larson, actually the Cylon race in that series was the product of an entirely alien culture. They weren't created by humans like in the new series. And in the old series, the Imperious leader of the Cylons, these were very ancient draconian, reptoid/dinoid, avian-type creatures that had incredible lifespans, but there were so few of them that they had to create an entire race of robots to serve as their society. And they just sat back and kind of directed them. And in the series, because they didn't have the budget for it, the Cylon Imperious leader spoke through a mechanical construct using the elegant voice of that British actor who used to be in the Avengers. But finally what happened was after the series went off the air, there was a action figure company called Trendmasters, which is now out of business, that actually released the action figure of the Cylon Imperious leader, the reptoid, dinoid, Draco avian-type creature that Glenn Larson had imagined. And if you look up on eBay or someplace like that, it'll still be selling here and there. But the Cylon Imperious leader, it's one of the most imposing for 6 inches. It's this incredible-looking creature that is reptilian, but for some reason they gave it seraphim wings, meaning one pair extended upwards and one pair pointed downwards. And its wrists are encircled, of all things, in Uthorn. And it's equipped with not only a high-tech space-age harness and a bident kind of weapon, but it also has this Bali type of mask like Mr. Rhodes described. So that was the fun thing I wanted.
Oh, wow, fascinating. You know, there's a lot of those collector items out there that have to do with other productions. It kind of tells me that if you look closely back at the media through a number of years, you can actually see that dinosaurs and reptilian humanoid characters became an increasingly more used form throughout the years in science fiction, but also in antiquity as well. But you're right. You get you get those type of models and hold on to them, because one of these days, they'll be collector's items, and you'll be the only one hanging on to one.
That's incredible, and I hope you get a hold of one. Certainly, you of all people would deserve to have one.
I would love to have one. I would love to have one.
Yeah, they're not that expensive. I mean, I got mine for only a few bucks each, and that was, because nobody knows how valuable they might be. But on a more serious note, definitely throughout the Cold War, the Americans used to be very enthusiastic about civil defense, and I share your enthusiasm, Mr. Rhodes, for the submarine civil survival insurance as a public employment option, because back in the days of the Cold War, what American government workers and military men remembered was that Nagasaki, which Americans call the forgotten bomb, was forgotten for a reason. Nagasaki proved in a very real sense not to work, because when Nagasaki was dropped, the bomb on Nagasaki, 3,800 Mitsubishi factory workers were in bomb shelters below the city, and they survived without a scratch and not a single ounce of radiation burn or exposure. And that's how effective Japanese bomb shelters were. And the emperor felt that they were so valuable, he pulled troops away from the front to continue with that construction before the ceasefire was declared. And but the Soviets sent field agents into the United States, and during the 60s, they discredited the entire civil defense movement with campus agitation and media subversion. So the entire public grew demotivated, and that's when the American elites decided to create a decided to create an elite survival shelter program, mostly mostly in places like Mount Weather. And I knew an elite forces U.S. Army Ranger sniper who was invited to work security at Mount Weather. I believe it's in the Virginias. He was given a tour, but the commitment was they wanted only elite forces to serve as security, former Green Berets, Ranger snipers, the best of the best. But the commitment was you had to live there and retire there so you would have a stake in the community. And he was given a tour of Mount Weather, and he said underground there were fully equipped hospitals and schools, and everywhere all the walls had fantastic nature murals, and there were even tropical rooms with swimming pools that were like hothouses. So I wanted to share that with you to show you how the elite intends to live. While it used to be a point of pride for any American male to provide a shelter for his family, but as you know, Mr. Rhodes, for some reason, mostly the reasons that I gave concerning subversion, and what's so frustrating about it is that both Russia and China continue expanding.
Oh, continue at an alarming rate. They are expecting something to happen, but here in the United States, it's absolutely silent. As a matter of fact, I know that during the Reagan administration, they had cut back the supplies of potassium iodide because they felt that having a supply of potassium iodide, which is helpful for your thyroid to be able to survive nuclear radioactivity, they had cut back their supplies because they thought it undermined the Americans' confidence in nuclear power programs. But we really do need to follow the leader in this, and I would hope in the back of my heart, I would hope that maybe the media would pick up on this and start giving us a new focus and showing what imagination and technology can do with helping Americans survive with what's about to happen. There's no need for us to be led down a perilous path by our leaders when issues like this at their fundamental core are not being addressed for us, because it's about national security, not just about individual elite security.
Okay, very good. Thank you, John. Let's go to Manitoba, Canada. Hi, Sandy. Go ahead.
Hi. I have a question about the comments you made regarding level 7 and the characteristics of the humans that are housed at level 7. Now, you said they were persons with mental illness?
The security personnel, according to Thomas Costello, were informed by their employers that the individuals being used in scientific research and genetic alteration were irreversibly insane, and that they were unwanted parts of society, and that many of them were criminally insane. They had done something wrong. Mm-hmm. And that they were instructed not to talk to any of the subjects that are being used, and believing this, it allowed them to be able to carry out their duties, as distasteful as they are. Just seeing these people in this condition and hearing the pleas for help or the whimpers of crying in the dark or something, I mean, that would really eat away at somebody. But given that as a background, they felt that they were able to deal with it. But once it was discovered that some of these people were actually reported missing, the whole story changed. And there were other issues going on in the base at that time, supposedly between security personnel and scientists, and some sort of shootout that took place because some notable figure came down from the Pentagon and whipped out a gun and just shot one, thinking, well, it's just an animal, I can do what I darn well want. And that just didn't have to be the case at that point. But, and so that's what I know about the human subjects down there.
John, as a crypto hunter, do you look at Bigfoot at all?
Yeah, we can't help but see the different reports coming in, even in Bishopville, South Carolina, when I've been there investigating with Sheriff Liston Truce. I always associate myself with these sheriffs in these rural areas because they're so knowledgeable and down to earth. They'll be the first ones to say, I suspect an alien or something. But in looking at the types that were down there, they had reported them wearing furs or being seen in furs, but having claws and scales and three-toed claws. And so everything was talking about a dinosaur man or a lizard man, but at the same time people kept saying, well, I saw fur. When I looked out my window, all I could see is this big bulk of fur beside me, but they said it wasn't a bear. It could be that some of these rather not as progressive reptilian humanoids that live in caverns near the surface of the earth are somewhat akin to like the natives living in the Amazon jungle that just like recently that had never seen an airplane before, where they throw a spear at it thinking it's a big iron bird. There might be some reptoids out there in remote areas that are just as wild, but they may have actually learned how to wear a fur just like a caveman would learn how to wear a fur for warmth. Because remember, their outside temperature is not as regulated as true warm-blooded animals. So I can only imagine that if there was a pack of them out there, that they would cover themselves. So these reports bleed over between Bigfoot and lizard man. And we even have some guys that, research Bigfoot, and they go out to South Carolina, and they go, well, this is a Bigfoot, obviously. They kind of dismiss everything else. But that just really isn't the case, I think that we're looking at something far more complicated and animal nature and the way that culture develops using clothing and such like that would say that there's something else going on that's not just so black and white as, oh, it's a Bigfoot.
Let's go east of the Rockies. Hello, Brian in Indiana.
Hello, Mr. Rhodes. I apologize. My cell phone's cutting in and out a little.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead real quickly with your question, Brian, then I'll put you on hold.
Sure. Just curious.
We lost them.
Uh-oh.
Cell phones, John.
Yep, he's gone.
Louisville, Kentucky. Mike, it's your turn. Hi, Michael.
Hello, George. John.
Hi, Mike.
How are you all both this evening?
Good.
Very good.
Great show, great topic. John, I wanted to ask you, I was reading a book not too long ago about Nikola Tesla, and in that book, toward the end of it, there was a little story in there about this deals with an underground facility that may be located at the bottom of a crater deep in the Amazon jungle, where there's supposedly is fantastic research being conducted. They said that may be a possible source of some of the UFOs that people are seeing, and that, strange as it sounds, that some of the top scientists that existed back, like at the turn of the 20th century, had actually gone there, and instead of their reported deaths, that they had actually gone to that location, such as scientists like Marconi, Tesla himself, and others, and were living at this place underground, and fantastic, research is being going on there. That it didn't mention anything about it being of alien origin exactly, but the part in the book was not really. It was kind of vague, actually, to be honest with you. But it just mentioned that this was a theory, and that possibly even psychic Edgar Casey had seen this in a vision. So I might read up on it a little bit more, see if I can find out some more information, about that on the internet somewhere. But my question to you was, have you ever heard of anything like this?
Well, I had not have heard of
that location.
Yeah, I had not heard of this specific location. I do suspect that when they have discovered underground locations that are either ancient or whether our government or some other private corporate group has built them, that our leading scientists of our day would end up going there to do research. We know up in Sonora, California, there was the Aero Club up there that were designing in lighter-than-air ships at the very earliest part of this last century, and they were flying them around and seen as being something quite remarkable because nobody else had them yet.
Right.
So, and you know, that whole work with Dellenschau, and it's very fascinating, and I think that, you know, they have used the underworld to hide things from us for a long time. It's very secure down there, and it's out of the public view, and more importantly, it's out of satellite view as well, which is the main form of terrestrial espionage from one country to another. So you have to take everything off the surface. When we're looking at Area 51, we're just looking at it as a sideshow. Mm-hmm. When we're looking at the TTR, the Tonopah Test Range, we're looking at just, you know, what they're allowing us to see. All these locations, they don't really care about because the majority of it is all underground.
Well, everything here
that are fantastic about, you know, an Olympic-sized single-piece stainless steel swimming pool. Mm-hmm. I mean, fantastic things.
Everything that you see about Area 51 is so, I want to say smoothed over or something, because all you see is rooftops of buildings. I mean, you don't see any detail. You don't. That's as far as you're allowed to see. Because I looked at a website that had to do with Area 51, but I mean, I was very disappointed because it was an aerial view, and all you saw was a scattering, you know, smidgen of buildings. But, you know, no sign of any activity or anything like this, you know, or nothing, but, and certainly no flying saucers sitting on the ground or anything like this.
They've got those hidden away.
Oh, yeah.
Tucked away in a little shelter.
That's one of these things that falls into the category is, you know, they don't want you to see this, you know.
Exactly. Hey, we got to take this break. We'll come right back with you, John Rhodes, and final phone calls in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Indeed. John Zaffis, Carmen Reed join us on our next Coast to Coast program. He, a paranormal investigator. Carmen Reed will tell her story about living in a haunted former funeral parlor. Why would she do that? But it's a strange story. That'll be our next Coast to Coast show. Up next, final phone calls with John Rhodes on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. We've got John Rhodes, and we've got your phone calls as well. John, great job tonight, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. You know, it's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you, George.
Yep. No matter where we are, conferences, this program, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's go to Vancouver, Canada. Hello, Mary. You're on with John Rhodes. Mary?
You've covered a lot of areas here, elements tonight, like between governments and extraterrestrials and Hopis and stuff. And I don't doubt our governments are you know, building stuff underground. But I have a little concern with the Hopi stuff. The figures that you spoke of, the coyotes, like the Hopis had Coyote Clan, right? They had the Snake Clan, the Ant People, and all this, right? Like those were clans, right?
Right.
And the fellow that called earlier about seeing the dog in the that changed to a devil, well, the Hopis had, like their priests had a two-horned headdress, right? And they're, I believe that when they're doing their ceremonies and stuff, that they can do shape-shifting and stuff. So if during a ceremony somebody comes out as a dog to see this guy, there's something I got to say first. There's a Hopi image of a man holding a dog by the tail. Okay, that's somewhere in the Black Forest, and that's a symbol of a priest, a person's coming to help, but he comes in the form of a dog, right? And that's I'm just thinking that some of what you're saying might be getting mixed up with symbolism from the clans. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
No, I understand that. I'm not sure that he was speaking about anything related to clans, the Hopi clans. Am I wrong, George, or did I misunderstand that?
I think you're right, John.
Yeah, I know that there's Coyote clans, there's the Bear clan, there's the Snake clan, there's different clans. When the Hopis first came up from the underworld, they were led by a star to various locations, and each place the star stopped, they developed a clan, and that's where we have the Hopi Mesas as they are today. The shape-shifting does occur on reservations, but usually a large part of it has to do with the person who's having the encounter themselves. Are they receptive to being able to see something like that? You know, we've heard many reports in which people have seen UFOs, but other eyewitnesses that could have been standing by didn't see anything, yet they were standing side by side with each other. So, and even the Virgin Mary sightings that occurred, the crowds could not necessarily see what the children were seeing. So a large part of shape-shifting could actually occur on a physical level, but at the same time, there's a personal level that's involved as well. Now, with him seeing something like that, I believe that there's probably a chance for him to be highly receptive to feeling and sensing the evil coming from that dog or its intentions at that point in time, to where he felt the demonic presence. There's something called eidetic memory, and children use this. It's actually, scientists call it eidetic memory, and it's actually where your visual field, your eyes, can have an overlaying like transparency, where you have another image being put there by your imagination. It's not having a hallucination or anything like that, but it's the way the optics are connected. It doesn't mean that it's false. It's not really there, but it means that something is causing a paranormal event to where that would occur. So when he was looking at the dog, he was actually himself involved in some sort of an energy exchange or a paranormal event at the time. So, and I understand that certain animals will show themselves to individuals in order to get them on some sort of a quest of their own or to give them a sign. In this case, the dog could have been a sign for him on a personal level, but I wouldn't know. I don't know how in his own life he would interpret that.
Okay, next up, let's go to Dallas, Texas. Hello, Keith. How are you?
Yes, pretty good. Thank you for taking my call. One quick funny thing. I couldn't help but notice that James Carville, he looks more like a reptilian than anybody else I can think of lately. But on a more serious note,
I would agree with you. There are quite a few of them that do, you know.
Yeah.
And that's not saying anything nice about a reptoid.
Yeah, but on a more serious note, though, and I kind of thought about this question while I was holding, if that's okay if I can ask it. But I've heard another guest come on George Norrie's program by the name of Stephen Quayle talk about these things called giants. And, Quayle has talked about a supposed super secret military force of some kind that fights these things or tries to contain these things. It sounds to me like if there is such a level of the military that does deal with cryptological phenomenon such as giants, which is what Stephen Quayle was describing, it would also deal with this phenomenon that you're describing. So do you see any intersection of these two phenomenon, giants on one hand and reptilian humanoids?
Well, the ancient texts actually do refer to the angels that descended from heaven and took for themselves human wives and had men that were of great renown. And there were giants in the earth in those days. They refer to these men being very large human beings. If we're talking about something, reptilian humanoid, 6.5 to 7 feet tall, I sat down in Los Angeles during an interview with somebody, a well-known television personality that was a psychiatrist, and also a cantor from a synagogue, which is like a rabbi. And we were talking about, the reptilian humanoid aspect of Judaism. And he said, as a matter of fact, Goliath was more like a dragon. A lot of people don't know this. He was more like a dragon man than he was anything else. And I said, you're kidding me. And they go, no. The original texts actually talk about this man that was large. He didn't look like normal human beings. He looked like that of a snake, but a man. And he had a foul odor to him, a real stench. And I just sat there with my jaws open looking at this guy telling me the story because I had never thought of that in those terms before. But here we had it right out of the, a voice of authority in regards to the ancient text. But yes, that would mean that there would be a definite correlation between something, it would infer a correlation between large giants and reptilian humanoids. And as these beings are described by experiencers, they're definitely gigantic in stature compared to a normal person.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Next up, let's go to Steve, first-time caller in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, George. It's great to hear from you.
Thank you. Good to have you on
and
the show.
Mr. Rhodes, pleasure to be able to talk to both of you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, both of you are very familiar with David Icke's books, apparently The Biggest Secret and Children of the Matrix, where he talks about, blood rituals of the royal family of England, sacrificial so that they can maintain their DNA so that they could look humanoid. And also the presidents of the U.S. have the same, they haven't been elected, but they've been selected because they have, English, they've been selected because of their English descent. Basically, my questions are, you brought something up earlier I thought was quite, it just dawned on me. The underground city, you said, was concentric circles. Now, if you read Timaeus, Plato's Timaeus, about the outline of Atlantis, the architecture, it sounds a lot like the above city of what Atlantis used to be, and also the whole thing with the with the Mayans with their snake worship and whatnot. And they always say that the Antichrist is going to come first. And I'm sitting here thinking December 21st, 2012. The Mayans, one caller called on our previous show that maybe, the Mayans might be coming back. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, maybe that's what's going to happen, around December 21st, 2012. I'm just curious what your philosophy or, your thoughts on that, is. And, I mean, and if you ever watch the X-Files, this is all kind of like, too, with the reptilian being descendants of the dinosaurs. It's kind of like the X-Files, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, a lot of television and the media has been influenced by what they've been reading on the internet. These guys that come up with scripts and stories, they're out there and they're fishing in websites of researchers and UFO researchers and different individuals like that to see what they can skim from the surface and create scripts from. That's just that's just fodder out there for them. So the influence of the reptilian humanoid image in the media, to some degree, can be pointed back to even the Reptoid stuff research site. Even what is it? Star Trek even had a television program, Origins, in which they talk about a reptilian humanoid race that was trying to make connections with the humans, saying that they were connected to them in some way in their ancestry. So a lot of that is a matter of media influence. Your question started to turn towards the eschatology of 2012, meaning end times predictions and such like that. We are told that there will be a dragon that returns in the end times, according to Revelation. Some of the older books, like the Testament of Solomon, actually speak in terms of at that time when they come back, there will be two dragons. One will be, it's written, one will be the true Savior. The other one will not be the Savior. So if we're supposed to be confused between the two of them, it's even scripted in the ancient text. It'll be much more difficult than you can imagine. If we have the devil come back as a reptilian humanoid, who's to say that a Savior wouldn't do the same? To say, look within your heart and you'll know. Don't be convinced with what you see with your eyes, because that's just the story of illusion you've been living.
Absolutely. And I mean, and the underground concentric circle that you mentioned, I mean, that's the way the Atlantis has laid their
Plato
city
described
up.
Atlantis in that same configuration, absolutely. And there may be underground cities that have that same configuration. We just don't know because we don't know of them yet.
I got to get your books, man. It sounds fantastic. Last thing I wanted to say was real quick, John, was that I met a kid from Kentucky who I gave David Icke's books because I hadn't seen your books, and I gave him The Biggest Secret, and he said, "Oh my God!" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Sorens, that's my dad was in the military, and he met them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm this is a 21-year-old kid. I'm 44, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He said, no. He said, my dad literally met one of them, and they called him Soren. Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm like, well, yeah, I know from David Icke's books that they call him.
Right, David Icke, when he wrote his book, just before it went to print, we were in communication with each other through other colleagues, and the information was being provided to him. I think if you read The Biggest Secret, he cites me like 18 times in his chapter about the reptiles. A lot of the information was being provided, but then the channel of information was closed down, and there was a lot of hype attached to the subject matter, which almost drew it into a point of ridicule. And even to this day, people get whipped up into a frenzy looking on the internet saying that, digital artifacting in the eyes make it look like vertical slit pupils, and they go overboard saying, oh, well, we're surrounded by reptiles and all this. And that's part of the manipulation of human fear in order to provide an answer of peace and worship, when really it's not that bad. 70% of all the contacts are either neutral or benevolent. There's only 30% that tend to have the experience or feeling negative about the encounter or terrified. But that gets larger press because you go to the video store, you're going to see a lot of horror shelves at the store, a lot of horror movies out there on the store shelves, versus the ones that aren't like that. They tend to sell more, and they get whipped. It's easier to get. People love a thrill ride. So it's happening. It's not happening as much as we're being indoctrinated to believe it's happening, but it's definitely is a reality that's occurring right here and right now.
Okay, next up, let's go to Salt Lake City, Utah. Josh, go ahead, Josh.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show tonight.
Sure.
I was just calling to actually share an experience and possibly ask some questions. A close friend of mine actually lives down in West Jordan and was walking around his neighborhood and came along this tunnel opening. Mm-hmm. And as he got closer to the opening, he said he saw a small creature at the mouth of the opening, which he described as kind of your stereotypical gray, I suppose, and said that it had large black eyes, but he looked at it and it had no mouth. Mm-hmm. And he said as soon as the creature looked up and saw him, it screeched and ran back into the cavern. And not long after this, he got a group of his own friends down and went to explore, and they said that they went to the cavern to shine their lights inside, but it was so dark they couldn't even see the end of the tunnel. And they shined a laser pointer down, and they said that they heard the scream again. And the way that he described it to me was that it was incredibly high frequency and low frequency at the same time, and said he's never heard anything like it. And I had gone down to the caves myself and hadn't found anything, but Utah's also kind of notorious for having underground caverns beneath the whole city for the Mormon temple, and I was curious if you might have any input on that, or if you've heard anything from Utah.
I've heard of the reports from Utah, up and down from Utah, Idaho, and Montana, straight down to Arizona, and that area in there is rich with different types of modern legends, and I call them legends only because some of these stories are epics about the encounters people have had with strange different types of beings in caverns and caves, especially in the mountain areas. Utah, one of the reasons I think Utah stands out in my research is only because I know that the Mormons had sent down an archaeologist, Taylor Hansen, I think, down to Mesoamerica and researched the life and times of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, godlike being, I guess, man, priest, probably a druid priest that they had encountered many years ago. And even to this day, they believe that he may have been an incarnation of Christ. But this directly associates the reptilian image with that of the Mormons and the Utah area.
All right, John, we're almost out of time, my friend. How about your website? Give it out.
Hey, it's www, of course, reptoids.com, reptoids.com.
Good luck on your travels. Good luck on your research, John.
Thank you. And if I don't see you sooner, I'll be seeing a lot of people at the New Living Expo over in San Francisco on April 25th.
Absolutely. That's John Rhodes, folks, the crypto hunter. He's one of a kind. For Dave Caprita, Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Ross Mitchell, George Knapp, Ian Punnett, and Art Bell, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe.